So good afternoon. I'd like to just sort of say thank you for having me along today. And thank Michelle for putting on today as well. I think it's been fantastic to listen to the variety of different speakers and people who are really coming from a diverse and different points of view. I think that's been really fantastic and something that I've really enjoyed. Can I have the clicker?
Oops.
Sorry.
Different one.
Different one? Good one. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about eliminating silos. Michelle and I caught up for a coffee maybe a couple of months ago, and this idea of this sort of event was kind of in its gestation periods. I've got pregnancy and babies on the brain. And we talked about the need to eliminate silos. So I want to talk to you today a little bit about that, but more specifically, and I think sort of coming off Paul's talk, one thing that's really important to me, I think something that's become more important to me as I've gone on, is that actually how we make things is more important than what we make. So I agree, definitely, we've just got to go out there and do shit. We just have to go out there and make stuff. But actually the process of really doing that and the process of being enthusiastic and just carefree enough to go out there and try to make stuff is what we see as being the real impediment in the work that we do. We work, in my role at Yammer, I work with a number of large different corporates and large organisations. It's not limited to any sort of particular breed. One of our clients is Earth Hour. They use it fantastically well to engage with everybody who's running a different sort of lighting event all around the world. If you're running a lighting event, if you're running you're turning the lights off in Israel, you're able to talk to people in Sydney, for example, about how you're organising your event, and they use Yammer to do that. But the important thing is how they've set themselves up to do that is what's more fascinating to me. Earth Hour is a team of 8 people, and they scale across to thousands and thousands and thousands of people running different events all over the world. And how they do that is really, really interesting. So I'll talk a little bit about that later on. I also really want to talk about Yammer itself, and that's really what I'm going to talk about mostly. I'm going to talk about how we do things. I'm going to talk about how we make shit, because I think that's really interesting, and I've been really amazed to go and find how the sausages are made within the sausage factory. But before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how something else was made, and if I can just cue the music. If I can get everyone to close your eyes, just for a little bit. So the music that you're listening to is by a guy called Brian Eno. Now, Brian Eno we all probably know of. He's the producer and he makes ambient music and all of that sort of stuff. I bought his latest album, Lux, which is what you're listening to now. And I bought that probably about sort of 10 months ago. And I bought it because the idea of it to me was really, really impressive. He had been commissioned by a sort of place in Turin in Italy called the Palace of Venaria, I believe it's called, and they were coming up on a big anniversary of theirs. It might have been, I forget exactly how many years, but they wanted to commission a piece of artwork that would be able to be listened to, and this is what he made. Now, the interesting thing about what he did is when he was commissioned, you can open your eyes now if you like. This is the venue, so I'm not sure if I had that up before you started listening, but you can almost feel like this music should be played in this venue, right? It's airy, it's light, it's beautiful, it's ambient. When he was first commissioned, he went off into his studio and worked in his dreary, drab, very small, very cramped London studio for a number of months, creating and producing the record. Now, it's when he finished this is why I love this story, when he finished the album, he flew to Turin, he flew to this very place, this is where the music was being played, this is essentially the market, if you like, and he played the music that he produced in that venue, and it didn't work at all. It didn't connect. It didn't speak to the music he'd wanted to create, and also it missed the mark because it just didn't capture the subtleties. He was expecting it's a really old building, and he was expecting a really dank, old kind of Gothic almost type of English cathedral, and what he got was this beautiful, beautiful palace. And so you know what he did? He moved to Turin for the next couple of months and completely rewrote the album there. And I find that really interesting because it's not about what he made that's important. It's a beautiful piece of music and it's lovely and it's amazing, but it's how he made it that was more important. He could only have made the album he made in London because he was in London. And he could only have made this album because he was in Turin. And I think that's a very big thing that we're seeing coming up, and I think we're seeing organisations begin to understand, okay, right, well, it's not just about efficiency, it's not just about productivity, it's not just about creativity. It's actually about fundamentally rewiring the way that we go about doing our work. It's about rewiring the way we've actually built our companies, because that in itself will engender future employees and future people to be engaged, to have the burning eyes, if you like. It's very hard to have burning eyes in a dank London studio, but it's really easy to have burning eyes when you're in an amazing place in Turin. Thanks for the music, Carl. I might turn that off now. So one of the really interesting things, and I think the rubber hits the road for me, and we're really, at Yammer, this is what we do. This is what our company stands for. This is our purpose. Our purpose is to help companies figure that out and say, rightio, you've got good people, and we talk to senior executives, CEOs all the time. And those CEOs and executives and leaders and everyone says we've got the best people. Pia's not alone. There's great people in every organisation that are just trying to do stuff. The burning eyes are already there. It's not a case of lighting them up. It's a case of letting them go. And so we go into organisations and say, this is how you can do it. But often the question we get is, well, this is not really real. Like, well, we can't do that. Or you might say for the first time, oh, why don't we just get rid of this or stop doing that? Like, oh, we can't do that. And the question sort of, it comes back to us time and time again. The Fortune 500 churns at 8%, and this is really where the rubber hits the road. Every year, 8% of that number fall out of that mark. Since 1995, half of the Fortune 500, so half of the Fortune 500 in 1995 is now no longer there. Disruption is happening all the time, and it's happening all amongst us. We hear the classic stories of the things like Blockbuster and all that sort of stuff. But most of the time it happens a lot more slowly and with a lot less fanfare, and companies just kind of cease to exist. The reason this happens is because companies were not built for change. Think about it for a moment. The company that you're working for now, and I've worked for a bunch of them, they are not built to change. They're not built for resiliency. They're built for processing and efficiency, and they're also now being built for opportunity seeking and creativity. There are companies now that have been built to be creative. But what happens when creativity isn't something that's defined by the market, or perhaps the market's asking for? And personally, creativity will always have a place for me. But I think we need to start realising that actually what we need to be doing, our main charge as people with burning eyes and all those sorts of things, is making shit, but is also making companies that make shit. And that's what we do at Yammer. So at Yammer, we have really taken another look at how we structure our organisation, and also we've had some fantastic senior leaders that have really led the journey to say, well, actually, let's challenge some of this stuff. Why do we need to have this? And I wanted to share a little bit about how we do that today. So our engineering team, they sort of will get together, and they've really sort of thought about how they go about reorganising the way that team is structured. Adam Pisoni is our CTO, and Chris Gale is our VP of Engineering. And I wanted to sort of share a little bit of an example about how we go about building one particular feature, because I think that shows kind of a lot of the different purposes that we have. Our motto is pretty simple. There's a really good, just go back to that. The website's not there anymore, but if you sort of Google Yammer product development approach, we've got a really sexy site that sort of goes through what we do. But essentially for us, the core unit of what we do is a team. Just like we were saying before, people now, that we've gone through the stage where people are seeking opportunity, and now they're moving on to that to say, well, now I want to be, it's not just success, it's not just money that I want from work, I also want the chance to be, to be successful in front of my peers, to work with my peers. I think Pia was mentioning that before. And really what we find is the best medium to do that is a small team. So at Yammer, the engineering department has no hierarchy. So you have a team. For example, if you're a front-end guy, you'll be a part of the front-end team. But the way the work gets done is decoupled from that. So for example, your boss, your manager, is not the person that decides, or helps you through with your work. They might be a mentor, or they might be someone that can help give advice. But the actual management of that, the actual management of you as a person is actually your team. So what happens is, and I thought I'd show this example, is when a product comes time to, or when a feature comes time to be built, it goes through a whole bunch of different processes, and then we put a team around that. None of this is really amazingly special. It's not a particularly new framework. I think it's just the application of it and the approach to that. So the team is formed from a couple of people from each sort of the large groups, front end, back end, depending on the kind of stuff you have. We have a huge whiteboard at Yammer. Every engineer only works on one thing at a time, which is another sort of little thing that we came to. Engineers work best. There's a really great article by Paul Graham, Maker's Schedule versus the Manager's Schedule. Has anyone read that? Yeah, it's worth a read if you've read it. So engineers don't make things in hour blocks, they make things in half-day blocks. And even bigger than that, they make things in day blocks. So why would you get them on one separate project? Why would you get them on more than one project? So each engineer only works on one thing. When that happens, they're formed into their teams. They then work only with that team. And everybody in that team is the people that you need to get the job done. So one of the other biggest blockers in organisations is when you're waiting on something, right? Somebody says, oh yeah, I need Bob to comment on this, or I need, Bob's the guy that's got the answer to that. Funny little anecdote from hospital where we just had our baby. There's one nurse that walks around the floor who helps women with bladder problems, and a lot of women have bladder problems, obviously, after pregnancy. But there's one woman that kind of does that. So her name was Jennifer, and she was fantastic. But we had to wait for Jennifer. So there's blockers and there's impediments to getting your work done. Now, if they'd had a Jennifer in every place, then we'd be able to get out of the hospital a lot quicker. But of course, there's resource restrictions. So it's about balancing that. But for us, we've taken that same approach with Yammer. So everybody that needs to be involved in the team is involved in the team. And if you can't make a decision, if it comes to a point in the feature and it's like, oh, we need to talk to Bob about that thing, then that just doesn't happen. Bob is in the team at the start of the project. This is a really good example that I wanted to talk a little bit about. This was one of our biggest things that we did last year. We did a complete redesign of the page, essentially. We called it the intranet redesign. When that happens, a team is formed around that, but also a group that is completely open. So you can see, it's the intranet redesign group is where this message happened. And the reason I like this is it kind of shows some of those principles. Oscar is a guy that worked at Yammer, and I believe he was a front-end guy, and Chris is the senior VP of engineering, or the VP of engineering. And Oscar sort of pinged Christina and said, hey, you know what, look, deadline's coming. One of the other little things we do is we have a little rule that says 2 to 10 people for 2 to 10 weeks. So again, in a disruptive market where churn is happening and things are changing, the market's always changing, no project at Yammer goes for longer than 10 weeks. So everything happens within 2 to 10 weeks, and 10-week projects are now not really done that much either. Again, it's another one of those little rules that we've kind of said, yeah, why do we build things in more than 10-week times? We just don't know how people are going to use that. Again, go back to the Brian Eno example. He spent all that time making that album in London, but he didn't know how it was going to be perceived until he got to the gallery. And again, with us, our gallery is our users. So we have to constantly be putting things in front of them to say, hey, does this work? Is this connecting? Is this doing the job? So if we've got an organisation that doesn't allow us to do that, then we can't do that. And so this is just one really good example that I wanted to share. So Oscar pops up and says, look, the deadline's coming. We're about to run out of our time period. The rest of the team is ready to go, but I found some technical debt. Technical debt, for those of you that don't know, is stuff that's not critical. It doesn't stop the show, but it's nice to sort of clean it up because it makes it harder for the next guy to kind of code. And so he said, look, I'm at a fork in the road. I can either push the feature and we can get going on this, or I can fix the technical debt. And it's pretty much a 50-50 decision. That's sort of one thing that any that every engineer will face in their particular times. And so he kind of popped up and he said, look, what are your thoughts? And then he pinged back to Chris and said, look, it's in a pretty crazy state, it's your call. Essentially he sort of works through where he got to, the logic he got to, and he says, it's your call here, I don't know what to do. And Chris wrote back, and I think this is the kind of example we're seeing more and more of today, and what we're seeing more and more of in corporate Australia, is that Chris pinged back and said, it's not my call, it's your call. I haven't been in that code for months, if that. You've been in this code every day for the last 2 to 3 weeks. You know that more intimately than anybody else does in this organisation right now. What makes you think that I'm the one that's best placed to make that decision? And I think that's a really, really big shift. It seems really simple and really obvious, right? But how many of us in the room actually realise that when we're in that moment? When you're in that moment where somebody has come to you and said, hey, I need you to solve this problem, and we jump into problem-solving mode. But actually, the people that have actually been spending all their time and effort and energy, and they've been spending their passion trying to figure this thing out. Oscar was one of the best guys we had. He's the right guy to make that call, and that's really sort of what we're trying to help other organisations do with a product like Yammer. One of the best things I like about this is that Oscar actually left Yammer. And we've seen a few people sort of leave Yammer over the last couple of years or over the last year. But Oscar left for family reasons. He sort of wanted to go back to where he was from originally and kind of go back with his family, his young family. But and again, I think this is one of those signals that we see that really shows me that we're in a really great place, is that a lot of these people write blog posts, what they learned at Yammer, and the single thing that they keep saying, the single thing they keep coming back to, is not that they become a better engineer, although a lot of them say that, not that they became a better client person or a better salesperson, but that they learnt how to build an organization. They learnt how to create a place where shit got done, and where shit got done really quickly. And I think that's why I really sort of like that post. He's written a really fantastic post called What I Learned at Yammer. If you Google Oscar Godson and that title, you'll get it. So look, that's all I really wanted to share with you today. I think, again, it comes back to, I think we need to sort of take a step back a little bit. I think we need to sort of understand that people are really keen to participate, but we, as people that are kind of leading at this and people that care enough to come along to something like today for an afternoon, have to step back and kind of say, okay, great, now how are we going to make this? What are the systems we're going to use to do it? And then let's just keep getting on with it and getting it done. And so thank you for your time.